if you aren't a liberal before you're 30, you don't have a heart. But if you aren't a conservative afterwards, you don't have a brain. This is a common quote that I've heard many times before and that I often have wrestled with, but has probably been relatively true throughout my life. I've always been probably a little bit more libertarian-minded just because of my defiance for authority. But I want to dive into this specific interview with Thomas Sowell, probably one of the best well-known libertarians of our generation. Let's dive into it.
Not long ago, I asked you, Tom, what opinion, what view do you regret having held? And you replied that for more than a decade, you had been a serious Marxist.
Yes.
Explain that.
As that decade began, I was living in poverty.
How old?
19 years old.
19. So you're starting college at that stage?
Oh,
or?
good heavens, no.
No, all right.
I mean, I was out there working in unskilled jobs and trying to make ends meet, living in a rooming house.
That type of person generally flocks toward like a big government solution because they think that that is going to be the answer. That's the end all be all is, the government, if it's bigger, it will protect me. And it's kind of funny how we're watching that pendulum completely swing the other way now in something like, the government is incompetent, and I trust the free market to protect me. It's just an interesting, thought process to go through that. What's changed over the last, couple decades that the government went from this power that would protect, in theory, this bloated authoritarian regime that really only looks after itself.
You're living in Harlem?
On Harlem.
Right.
I'd heard about Marx, but I finally someplace found an old secondhand set of encyclopedias for $1.19, which I bought. And there was an article on Karl Marx, and it seemed to me that he explained these situations so well that...
and the situation was what? That you took the train from Harlem down to the lower end of Manhattan?
No, the other way around. Coming home from work, I would sometimes take the bus, and it would go right up Fifth Avenue past all these glitzy places, and across 57th Street where all the fancy stores were, and Carnegie Hall and the rest of it. And then finally, as I got near home, it would turn off this viaduct into 135th Street, and there was that sudden change in the whole scene at that point. And the question was, why was that? And the problem was two problems. One was that no one else had given any explanation. There was no competing explanation that sounded plausible.
In your life so far?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Just before he dives into the second one, this is where we really need to check ourselves. This is actually what I think is one of the biggest dangers for Bitcoin is the lack of a competing understanding, a competing other side. We create this echo chamber and we become no better than the fallen past. And I think that I would urge Bitcoiners to step out of the echo chamber, if nothing else, just to try to educate and sharpen your position. Because frankly, I think that the thing that could bring Bitcoin down is Bitcoiners not willing to step out of the echo chamber, not understanding how the world is changing, and not reacting to that change. Just my opinion. And
the other was that no one had cautioned me that it takes an awful lot more knowledge before you can make these kinds of sweeping judgments in any case. But fortunately, I'd been taught earlier to respect facts and so on. And so even during my years as a Marxist, I would read things by people who weren't Marxists. I would read facts and so forth.
But I have heard you say many times that you got a good education in the New York City public schools in Harlem.
Yes.
So they taught you to think. They may not have taught you Adam Smith and the defense of free markets, but they taught you to think.
Yes.
So taught you to think is something that we're missing from the public education system right now. I have a lot of knocks against how we teach our kids. We teach them facts. We teach them things that we want them to learn. We teach them a changing set of history books. How is it that history books have changed from my generation to my kids' generation? I don't understand how we can change the past like that. What we need is we need to bring up a culture of thinking, a culture of what do I want to see? Why is this important?
Continue the story if you would. You're a Marxist at the age of 19, taking the bus home from the southern third of Manhattan Island all the way up to Harlem. You remain a Marxist at the University of Chicago under the instruction of
Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman.
Yes.
How did that? If Milton couldn't crack you, you were a tough nut.
Well, but one summer working for the government, as an economist was enough to show me that the government was really not the answer.
That's it right there. The government was really not the answer. And it's not necessarily just this government that's not the answer. It's all government that's not the answer. I feel like, depending if you're red or blue, in Canada that means different things than in the US, funny enough. But the flavor of government is generally not the problem. The fact that someone else has domain over yourself, over your life and the decisions, the value you create with your time, the fact that someone else is really in control of that, that's the main problem. When you put an external force into a natural environment, the natural environment changes. And there are secondary, tertiary, and further effects down the road that ultimately are unintended consequences, typically negative, of the external force being brought in.
The government, that the level of understanding among the people, and I was in a program for interns where we saw the top officials of the Labor Department and so forth, and I realized these guys are not going to save us.
In other words, they were not the priestly caste that you might have been led to expect. They were ordinary chumps bashing their way through life as best they could like anybody else.
Yes.
I see. All right. And so, but intellectually, all right, you spend a summer working for the federal government, and that cures you of Marxism.
Yes.
But intellectually, when do you pick up the thread of free markets?
Oh, I guess. Well, I had always.
You thought back to what Milton had said.
That's right. It's not just Milton, but Hayek and the rest of them.
This is such an important point here, and why we have to, as Bitcoiners or as libertarians or as free market thinkers or whatever, anytime you are trying to convince someone of something else, you need not win the argument. Quit trying to win the argument. I have found myself caught in this problem so often that I try to convince the other person in that 35 minutes or that 80-minute conversation or whatever it may be. As you plant seeds, as those seeds continue to latch on, to understand, their viewpoint changes immediately. They don't have to agree with you right there. You just need to simply present them with facts or a frame of mind that they will then continue to question the world with. And I think that having that low time preference when like orange pilling someone or white pilling someone is super, super important, so that you don't have to get upset and get mad, have fun staying poor, and you suck, you'll get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. This is not the answer. The answer is maintaining a relationship, having the humility to say, you know what, that's fine, this is what I believe, think about it, and move on.
Because I had read all those people while I was still a Marxist.
A couple of, you have an essay in here entitled Marx the Man.
Oh, yeah.
Quote, Marx's angry apocalyptic visions existed before he discovered capitalism as the focus of such visions.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, the poems he wrote in his teen years, one of them in particular I remember went to this effect that, then will I walk godlike and triumphant through the ruins of the world. So he has these apocalyptic visions early on before he's ever even thought about capitalism.
And what the subtext, as I take it, of it's entitled Marx, not Marx the political philosopher, not Marx the economist, but Marx the man.
Yes.
And what I felt reading that essay is, in effect, it's like the scene in The Wizard of Oz where they pull back the curtain.
Yes, that's right.
The great and powerful Oz turns out to be an ordinary, cranky human being.
Yes.
And what you're saying is Marx is fascinating and highly intelligent, and in some cases, in some ways, kind of a nut.
Yes.
Just a man.
Yes.
Wow, this is actually another really good. We think about the government, we think about these parties, we even talk about politicians as if they're not human beings. That's even gotten worse as we've taken away the faces of humans on social media. It's so easy to attack the other side on this digital format when you're not really thinking about the human being, the father, the son, the wife, the mother, the actual child of God that is the person that you're attacking. And when you think about them as human, it almost neutralizes the playing field. And these ultimate saviors that we've come to, people try to convince us that politicians or leaders could be, you realize aren't the case. They're just another man. People are just people. You and I are the same. We are just individuals making it through life. When you pull back the curtain, you realize that the person that you're watching, myself included, up on some pedestal is just a human being. And I think that who we put in charge is not the problem. The fact that there is someone in charge is the problem.
Another quotation from that essay: the members of the Communist League, we're talking now about the mid-19th century, Marx and Engels form, or they participate in the Communist League. The members of the Communist League were overwhelmingly intellectuals and professionals. It had the same kind of social composition that would in later years characterize many radical groups in which the youthful offspring of privilege called themselves the proletariat. Marxism is the conceit of rich kids with fancy educations.
Yes, you see that in these, what is this thing called, the Occupying Wall Street group. All these middle class accents and so on. I mean, how many working class people can afford to take a month off to sit around in parks and carry on and have all their electronic equipment with them and all the rest of it? I mean, come on.
Sleeping in sleeping bags with the first-rate down feathers.
Oh,
right,
yes.
Right.
I think it's less about even the time that these people are spending, in parks and these, soul-searching journeys, but it's more about the centralization of information. Depending on where you work, you have a very short feedback loop for how the world is. If you do not work hard, you will not get paid, because we need the hammer swingers to be good at swinging hammers. Otherwise, the nails don't go in and the buildings collapse. But when you live in theory land, you don't always get that short feedback loop, and you kind of have the ability to maybe be indoctrinated to a central point of information, whether it be the textbook, whether it be the teacher, whether it be the news, or whatever political science degree is going to be shoving some indoctrination down your throat. You, as an individual, kind of remove the ability to think critically, and your ability to get back to that first principles is so long. The journey back to that first principle is so long. That's why, generally speaking, the working class are going to be a quicker study to getting in this direction.
What stage was there a moment when you said, wait a moment, these putative Marxists and leftists and liberals, to use the term the way it's used in this country as a leftist, they have no knowledge of nor concern for what life is like up on 130th Street.
That's right.
There was a moment. Was there a moment or an incident when that just struck you, or was that kind of a progressive realization?
It was a sort of progressive realization.
All right, Ronald Reagan, the Thomas Sowell. I like juxtapositions here, from Karl Marx to Ronald Reagan, but you do it yourself. One old-fashioned way to judge a president is by result. A more popular way is by how well he fits the preconception of the intelligentsia or the media. By the first test, Ronald Reagan was the most successful president of the United States in the 20th century. By the second test, he was a complete failure.
Yes.
Complete failure. That is crazy. Judge me not by what they say, but what I do. I want to live in a world where we judge the presidents and the leaders based on what they do, not based on what some paid media clown is saying about them.
Marxists are rich kids with fancy educations. You've got the intelligentsia misreading Ronald Reagan, and you've got Tom Sowell from a very early age to the present, when he remains a fellow at Stanford, at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, making his career in academia all the same. How is it that you're able to swim against the current?
I don't know.
Please don't be quite so truthful. This is television. We need to...
Oh, I guess partly luck. I don't know. It's there are places. Like the Hoover Institution. No, it's no great handicap to have the views that I have here. And there are a few other places here and there.
That last bit, I would boil down to humility. I think that it would have been very easy to say hard work and research and the ability to think clearly and, all the stuff that taking credit for himself. But the fact that he attributed it to luck, I find, is the last and final litmus test to someone who's bettered themselves. And that's humility. I think that, I relate that back to Bitcoin and how, obviously, Bitcoin teaches us to be humble in our actions and in our spending. Even further, I take that back to Jesus and how the teachings of Jesus boil down to the greatest people that will enter the kingdom of heaven are those that are humble. It is ultimately humility that is the hack. It is the ability to lower yourself to a standard that you do not feel you are qualified in order to see the world from a different perspective, to then take a first principles approach and act accordingly. Humility is the life hack, ladies and gentlemen. Humility is how we take what we have today and make it better in the future. Humility is how we future-proof our lives, our bodies, our minds, our souls. It is humility that helps us stay sovereign. If you like this video, please let me know in the comments. Let me know what you disagree with. Am I just stuck in my echo chamber here, free market thinking? If you fall into the other camp, tell me where I've gone wrong. We should be doing this together, not as an argument. Don't try to convince me. Just state the facts. Just state what I've missed. I want to be in a world where iron sharpens iron. There is a truth behind this. There's also a balance behind this. We need to work together as citizens of planet Earth, as children of God, and work together. So subscribe, put the bell on, and comment below. What do you think?